The air in the National Stadium in Kingston, on April 22, 1978, did not feel like a place for music. It felt like a premonition of a funeral. Outside the gates, the political divide between the Jamaica Labour Party and the People's National Party had turned the streets into a sequence of kill zones. Inside, the humid night carried the scent of sweat and the heavy expectation of a miracle. We have often looked to our artists to do what our politicians cannot, to bridge the gaps carved by bullets and tribalism. That night, one man and one song attempted to pull a nation back from the edge of a self-inflicted abyss. This is the story of how a single melody became a ceasefire, how a rhythm born in the Caribbean changed the way the world understands the power of a unified voice. This is our history, written in the frequency of resistance and the harmony of survival. The year 1978 was a year of blood and concrete. To understand the weight of the One Love Peace concert, you have to understand the geography of the war. Kingston was a city of borders. If you lived on one street, you belonged to the green. If you crossed the intersection, you were in the orange. To be caught on the wrong side of that invisible line was a death sentence. The gunmen were not just criminals, they were the paramilitary wings of political ideologies. By the time Bob Marley returned to Jamaica from his exile in London, the body count had become the only reliable metric of the national mood. He had been shot in his own home 2 years prior, a direct message that even the most famous voice in the third world was not bulletproof. Yet he came back because the community demanded a mediation that the law could no longer provide. When the song Jamming began to pulse through the stadium speakers, it was not just another track on a set list. It was a calculated spiritual intervention. The bass line was a heartbeat for a city that had been holding its breath. As Marley moved on that stage, he looked less like a performer and more like a man possessed by the necessity of the moment. He called for Edward Seeger and Michael Manley to join him. These were the two men whose names were invoked every time a trigger was pulled in the ghettos of West Kingston. They represented the two poles of a fractured society. When they finally climbed onto the stage, the tension was so thick it felt like it could be touched. Marley took their hands. He forced them to clasp above his head, while the rhythm of the song provided the only neutral ground in the country. In that moment, the song Jamming transformed. It was no longer about a party or a dance. It was about the physical act of collision and the refusal to break. The lyrics spoke of a belief that holy Mount Zion would provide the strength to endure, but the visual was what changed Caribbean consciousness. For the thousands in the crowd and the millions who would later see the images, the sight of the two leaders holding hands was a psychic rupture. It proved that the war was a choice made by men, and therefore peace could be a choice made by men as well. The song acted as a container for all the grief and the hope of the previous decade. It was the first time many Jamaicans realized that their culture was more powerful than the political machinery that sought to divide them. But the miracle was fragile. Even as the final notes faded into the night air, the structural problems of the garrison system remained. The song had provided a moment of clarity, a brief window where the humanity of the opponent was visible. It taught us that music is the primary document of our struggle. It showed the world that a man with a guitar could command more authority than a man with a cabinet position. This was the awakening of the realization that Caribbean identity is forged in the fires of conflict and tempered by the cooling grace of the arts. We learned that night that while a song might not be able to stop a bullet forever, it can make the man behind the gun hesitate long enough to wonder why he is fighting in the first place. The hand clasp in the stadium remains the most significant image of political reconciliation in our history, but it also serves as a haunting reminder of the lives lost before the music was allowed to play. Long before the stadium in Kingston was built, another song was being written on the deck of a ship crossing the Atlantic in the opposite direction. In 1948, the Empire Windrush arrived at Tilbury Docks in England. Among the passengers was Aldwyn Roberts, known to the world as Lord Kitchener. As he stepped off the gangplank into the grey, cold mist of a country that had invited him to rebuild its ruins, he was asked to sing. Without a band and without a stage, he began the lyrics to "London is the place for me." It was a moment of supreme irony and profound cultural assertion. The song was a polite, upbeat calypso that masked the complex reality of the colonial relationship. It was the sound of the Caribbean claiming its place in the center of the empire that had long sat on its periphery. Lord Kitchener was a master of the double entendre and the social commentary that defines the Trinidadian calypso tradition. While the song sounded like a celebration of the mother country, it was actually a declaration of presence. By singing about his arrival in the heart of London, Kitchener was signaling an awakening of the diaspora. He was telling the world that the Caribbean was no longer just a collection of plantations and outposts. It was a mobile, intelligent, and creative force that was moving into the halls of power. The song became the anthem for a generation of migrants who were leaving the sunshine for the smog, trading the familiar rhythms of the islands for the uncertain promise of the British dream. It provided the emotional scaffolding for thousands of people who were about to face a level of racism and isolation they had never imagined. This song changed consciousness because it shifted the map of the Caribbean. It was the first time our identity was defined not by where we were, but by who we were, regardless of location. Kitchener's voice was the bridge between the colonial past and the global future. In the streets of Brixton and Notting Hill, the melody of London is the place for me served as a reminder of the wit and resilience of the West Indian mind. It forced the British public to hear a perspective they had ignored for centuries. The music was the only thing the migrants brought that the authorities could not tax or take away. It was a portable piece of home that allowed the awakening of a collective Caribbean identity in a foreign land. The struggle within the song was the gap between the lyrical optimism and the lived experience. As the 1950s progressed, the polite tone of Kitchener's early work began to collide with the reality of the no blacks, no dogs, no Irish signs in the windows of London boarding houses. The music had to evolve to meet the hardness of the new environment. The awakening was the realization that the empire was not a family, but a system of extraction. Yet, the song remained a touchstone. It represented the moment we realized we could occupy the space of the colonizer and still remain ourselves. It was the birth of the modern Caribbean diaspora, a global network of people who used rhythm to navigate the complexities of belonging. By the time the 1970s arrived in New York City, the Caribbean sound was undergoing another radical transformation. In the barrios of the Bronx and the clubs of Manhattan, the Puerto Rican and Cuban communities were blending their traditions into something explosive called salsa. This was not just a commercial label. It was a movement of reclamation. The song Anacaona, performed by Cheo Feliciano with the Fania All-Stars, became a lightning rod for this new consciousness. Anacaona was a Taino queen who resisted the Spanish conquest, and her story had been buried under centuries of colonial education. When the horns blasted and the percussion hit, the name of the forgotten queen was screamed into the microphones of the 20th century. It was a sonic resurrection. The impact of Anacaona was felt across the Spanish-speaking Caribbean and beyond. It was an awakening to the indigenous and African roots that had been suppressed in the pursuit of European respectability. The song forced the listener to confront the history of genocide and survival that defined the islands. It was gritty, it was loud, and it refused to be polite. This was the music of the street, the music of the people who were tired of being invisible in their own cities. It taught a new generation of Caribbean people that their history did not start with the arrival of the ships, but with the resistance of the people who were already there. It was the sound of a culture finding its voice in the middle of a concrete jungle. This awakening was not limited to the past. It laid the groundwork for the rise of artists like Tego Calderon, who would later use the same spirit to challenge the racial hierarchies within the Caribbean itself. The music became a tool for unmasking the internal prejudices that still lingered after the colonial powers had left. In every beat of the drum and every call and response, there was a message of defiance. We were learning that our music was our most effective weapon against the erasure of our stories. The song Anacaona was a bridge between the ancient resistance of the Taino and the modern struggle for dignity in the diaspora. It proved that the Caribbean consciousness is a continuous thread stretching from the pre-colonial forests to the neon lights of New York. The legacy of these three songs is the realization that the Caribbean is not a place of silence. We are a region that speaks through its rhythms when the traditional channels of power are closed to us. From the stage in Kingston to the docks in London, and the clubs of New York, our music has been the primary vehicle for our awakening. It has allowed us to see ourselves clearly, even when the world tried to tell us we were nothing more than a vacation destination or a labor source. The songs are the archives of our survival. They are the evidence that we have always known who we are, even when we had to sing it in a code that only our own people could understand. The question that remains for us is whether we are still listening to the lessons those melodies tried to teach us.